Imagine a massive ship built to conquer the seas, slowly tilting into the abyss because someone forgot to close a window. Good afternoon, you're watching 33 Facts. Here we tell amazing stories, scientific misconceptions, and unexplainable facts. Get comfortable. Let's begin. First foolish captain, Captain Francesco Schettino and the Costa Concordia disaster. January 13th, 2012. A massive cruise liner carrying over 4,000 people strikes rocks off the Italian island of Giglio. 32 people die. The ship capsizes and remains lying on its side like a beached whale for months. What caused this catastrophe? The captain decided to perform a salute, sailing dangerously close to shore to wave at friends and show off. He deviated from the planned route without proper authorization, brought the ship within just 150 meters of jagged rocks, and when the hull tore open, he abandoned ship while passengers were still trapped inside. Investigators found him on shore while crew members were still coordinating evacuations. He later claimed he tripped into a lifeboat. The court didn't buy it. Schettino received 16 years in prison for manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, and abandoning passengers. This wasn't seamanship, it was vanity with deadly consequences. But wait! Second foolish captain, Captain Joseph Hazelwood and the Exxon Valdez oil spill. March 24th, 1989. An oil tanker runs aground on Bligh Reef in Alaska's Prince William Sound, spilling 11 million gallons of crude oil into pristine waters. The environmental damage was catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of seabirds, sea otters, seals, and fish died. Cleanup costs exceeded $2 billion. The cause? Captain Hazelwood had been drinking. Blood tests showed alcohol in his system 9 hours after the grounding. But there's more. He had left the bridge in the hands of an unlicensed third mate who wasn't qualified to navigate those waters. The ship's radar wasn't working. Hazelwood had also failed to properly maneuver around ice. He radioed ahead about altering course, but then didn't supervise the turn. When the ship struck the reef, he was below deck, unavailable. His license was temporarily suspended, and he was convicted of negligent discharge of oil, though acquitted of more serious charges. The disaster led to massive reforms in oil transportation regulations, including double-hulled tanker requirements. And here's what's surprising. Third foolish captain, Captain Edward Smith and the Titanic. April 14th, 1912. The most famous maritime disaster in history. The unsinkable ship strikes an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sinks, killing over 1,500 people. Captain Smith was a respected veteran with decades of experience. So, what went wrong? He ignored at least 6 ice warnings from other ships. He maintained near maximum speed, 22 knots, through a known ice field on a moonless night with poor visibility. When lookouts spotted the iceberg, it was too late. The ship's design included watertight compartments, but they weren't tall enough. Water spilled over from one to the next like ice cubes in a tilted tray. There weren't enough lifeboats for everyone aboard because regulations hadn't kept pace with ship sizes. Smith had succumbed to iceberg complacency. He'd sailed these routes many times without incident and believed the ship's technology would protect them. He went down with his ship, but his overconfidence took hundreds of innocent people with him. Now here's where it gets interesting. Fourth foolish captain, Captain Yannis Avranos and the Oceanos cruise ship. August 3rd, 1991. The Greek cruise liner begins taking on water off South Africa's eastern coast during a storm. The captain and senior officers abandon ship, leaving passengers behind. What makes this even more absurd is that entertainers and crew members, not the captain, organized the rescue. A guitarist named Moss Hills used the ship's radio to coordinate helicopter evacuations. All 571 passengers and crew were saved, but no thanks to the captain. Avranos later defended himself, claiming he left to direct rescue operations from shore. Investigators and survivors were appalled. Maritime law and tradition demand the captain be last off a sinking ship. Avranos never faced criminal charges but became an international symbol of cowardice. His career was finished, and this isn't all. Fifth foolish captain, Captain Lim Jun and the Seawall ferry disaster. April 16th, 2014. A South Korean ferry carrying 476 people, mostly high school students on a field trip, capsizes. 304 people die, most of them teenagers trapped below deck. The cause was a fatal combination of incompetence and greed. The ferry had been illegally modified to carry more cargo, making it top-heavy and unstable. The captain hired an inexperienced third mate to navigate a tricky turn. When the ship began listing, the crew told passengers to stay in their cabins, the worst possible advice. Meanwhile, Captain Lee and his senior officers were among the first to evacuate, leaving children to drown in locked rooms below. Underwater rescue footage shows rows of students' bodies still wearing life jackets, waiting for help that never came. The captain was sentenced to life in prison for murder through willful negligence. The disaster sparked national outrage and led to South Korea's president eventually being impeached over the government's failed response. Now pay attention. Sixth foolish captain, Captain Shigenobu Nomura and the Ehime Maru collision. February 9th, 2001. A Japanese fishery training vessel with 35 people aboard is suddenly struck from below by a US Navy submarine, the USS Greenville. The fishing boat sinks within minutes. 9 people die, including 4 high school students. What happened? The submarine's commander, not technically a merchant captain but functionally in charge, was rushing through emergency surfacing drills to impress civilian guests aboard. He failed to properly check sonar and periscope readings. The submarine shot up through the ocean at high speed directly beneath the Ehime Maru, cutting it nearly in half. Investigators found that Commander Scott Waddell had been negligent in his safety procedures and had prioritized showmanship over caution. He was court-martialed and forced into early retirement. The US government paid substantial compensation and formally apologized. Let's go deeper. Seventh foolish captain, Captain Henrik Kurt Carlson and the Flying Enterprise stubbornness. December 1951. A cargo ship encounters a massive storm in the Atlantic. The hull cracks, the ship lists severely, and all crew and passengers abandon ship, except the captain. Carlson refuses to leave for 13 days, becoming an international media sensation as the ship slowly sinks. Salvage tugs arrive. A volunteer joins him to attach towing cables, but the ship ultimately sinks just 50 miles from safety. Here's the twist. Carlson was actually heroic in his stubbornness and became famous for it. But was it foolish? Maritime experts said yes. He risked his life and that of his volunteer assistant, Kenneth Dancy, for cargo that was insured. He could have died for nothing. His devotion to tradition and duty nearly killed him. Some called him brave. Others called him recklessly obsessed with an outdated code. But there's more. Eighth foolish captain, Captain Lee Jun-seok of the Sewol Ferry. Wait, we already covered that. Let me correct this. Eighth foolish captain, Captain James Clark of the SS Arctic collision, September 27th, 1854. The steamship SS Arctic collides with a much smaller French vessel, the SS Vesta, in thick fog off Newfoundland. The Arctic's iron hull is breached. Captain Clark orders full speed ahead, hoping to beach the ship before it sinks. Instead, the rush of water through the hole increases catastrophically, and the ship sinks within 4 hours. What's worse, the crew panicked, took the lifeboats for themselves, and abandoned passengers, including women and children. Over 300 people died. Captain Clark survived, but his decision to race towards shore instead of slowing down and organizing evacuation doomed hundreds. If you enjoy our videos about amazing facts, myths, and bold exposés, support us with a like and write the number 1 in the comments. If they're not working for you, put a 0. This helps us understand what interests you and make episodes even better. And here's an important detail. Ninth foolish captain, Captain Michael Vlahos of the MTS Oceanos. Actually, that's also Avranus again. Let me be accurate. Ninth foolish captain, Captain Marvin Anderson of the SS Admiral Nakhimov collision, August 31st, 1986. A Soviet passenger ship collides with a bulk carrier in the Black Sea near Novorossiysk. 423 people die in one of the deadliest maritime disasters of the 20th century. The investigation revealed shocking negligence. Both ships knew they were approaching each other. Both captains saw each other on radar. Neither took evasive action. They were playing a game of chicken, each assuming the other would turn. When they finally reacted, it was too late. The ships collided at full speed. The Admiral Nakhimov sank in just 8 minutes, so fast that lifeboats couldn't be launched. Investigators found both captains criminally negligent. Captain Vadim Markov of the cargo ship received 15 years in prison. The passenger ship's captain died in the disaster, but records show he'd been drinking and failed to follow navigation rules. Now the most curious part. 10th foolish captain, Captain Michael Vlahos of the Express Samina ferry disaster, September 26, 2000. A Greek ferry strikes a rock formation near Paros Island and sinks, killing 82 people. The captain and 3 crew members were watching a soccer match on television instead of monitoring the ship's course. The ship was on autopilot, but autopilot doesn't avoid obstacles. It just maintains a heading. When the vessel struck the rocks, chaos erupted. The crew was unprepared, evacuation was disorganized, and the captain initially tried to blame the rocks for moving. Later investigations proved the rocks had been on nautical charts for decades. The captain and crew were convicted of multiple counts of negligent homicide. This disaster could have been completely avoided if anyone on the bridge had been doing their job. And that's not everything. 11th foolish captain, Captain Francesco Schettino. We covered him already. Correction, 11th foolish captain, Captain Ernst Lehmann and the Hindenburg, May 6th, 1937. Technically an airship, not a sea vessel, but Lehmann was the commander. The massive German passenger Zeppelin catches fire while landing in New Jersey, killing 36 people. What caused it? The official investigation pointed to static electricity igniting leaking hydrogen. But Lehmann's decisions contributed to the disaster. He flew into a thunderstorm despite knowing the risks. He delayed landing, keeping the ship aloft longer than necessary in dangerous conditions. He allowed the ship to be filled with highly flammable hydrogen instead of safer helium because of cost and political factors. Lehmann himself was severely burned in the fire and died the next day. His last words allegedly blamed sabotage, but no evidence was ever found. The disaster ended the era of passenger airships forever. Here's what really intrigues. 12th foolish captain, Captain Ernest Colebrook of the Princess Alice Paddle steamer collision, September 3rd, 1878. A Thames River pleasure boat collides with a coal ship, the Bywell Castle, and sinks in less than 4 minutes. Over 650 people die, mostly working-class Londoners returning from a day trip. What went wrong? Both vessels were travelling at full speed in a narrow, busy channel. Both saw each other approaching. Captain Colebrook of the Princess Alice and the crew of the Bywell Castle each assumed the other would follow rules of the road and turn appropriately. Neither did. They collided head-on. The paddle steamer loaded with passengers broke apart instantly. Most victims drowned in water contaminated with raw sewage from London's outflows. Many who survived the impact died from swallowing toxic water. The inquiry blamed both captains, but Colebrook died in the disaster. New regulations for river navigation were implemented afterward. Let's move forward. 13th foolish captain, Captain Thomas Turner of the RMS Lusitania, May 7th, 1915. A British ocean liner is torpedoed by a German submarine off the Irish coast, sinking in 18 minutes and killing nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. The attack helped push the United States toward entering World War I. But could Captain Turner have prevented it? He'd received warnings about submarine activity in the area. He was advised to zigzag to make his ship harder to target. He didn't. He reduced speed to save fuel. He sailed in a straight, predictable line. He brought the ship close to shore rather than staying in deeper waters where submarines operated less effectively. The German U-boat commander had an easy shot. Turner survived and faced inquiries. Officially, the blame fell on Germany for unrestricted submarine warfare, but maritime experts quietly questioned Turner's judgment. He'd made his ship an easy target. And here begins the strangest part. 14th foolish captain, Captain Georgios Marinos of the MS Al Salam Boccaccio, 98 ferry disaster, February 3rd, 2006. An Egyptian ferry sailing from Saudi Arabia to Egypt catches fire in the Red Sea. The fire starts in the vehicle hold but spreads rapidly. Over 1,000 people die, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters. What went wrong? The ferry was overloaded with passengers and vehicles beyond safe capacity. Fire suppression systems malfunctioned. The crew tried to fight the fire by pumping seawater onto it, but this made the ship top-heavy and unstable. The captain's decision to continue pumping water caused the ship to capsize. Most passengers were trapped below deck and drowned or burned. Survivors reported that crew members prioritized their own escape. Captain Marinos drowned, but post-disaster investigations revealed systemic corruption. Safety inspections had been falsified, the ship wasn't seaworthy, and the company had bribed officials to overlook violations. This detail changes everything. 15th foolish captain, Captain Andrei Puko of the MV New Carissa grounding. February 4th, 1999. A bulk freighter runs aground on an Oregon beach during a storm, spilling 70,000 gallons of fuel oil. The environmental damage was severe. What happened? Captain Puko had anchored his ship just offshore to wait out the storm, but he anchored too close to the beach in an area known for strong currents. When the storm intensified, the anchor dragged and the ship drifted onto the sand. Rescue helicopters evacuated the crew. The ship then broke in two. Efforts to refloat it failed. Eventually, authorities decided to burn off the remaining fuel to prevent more spills. The burning wreck became a bizarre tourist attraction. Puko was fined $50,000. Investigations showed he'd ignored weather warnings and failed to position his ship in deeper, safer water. Let's examine the next point. 16th foolish captain, Captain Pyotr Klebnikov of the SS General Slocum Paddle-Wheeler Fire. June 15th, 1904. A passenger steamboat catches fire in New York's East River during a church outing. Over 1,000 people die, mostly women and children. It remains New York's deadliest disaster until September 11th. What caused such a catastrophic loss? The ship was a floating death trap. Life preservers had rotted and disintegrated. They were filled with cork that had turned to dust. Fire hoses were old and burst when crew members tried to use them. The crew had never conducted fire drills. Captain William Van Schaik, correction on the name, ordered the ship to continue at full speed towards shore rather than immediately beaching it on nearby land. The wind fanned the flames, turning the vessel into an inferno. By the time it reached shore, most passengers were already dead. Van Schaik was convicted of criminal negligence and served 3 years in prison. Investigations revealed the Steamboat Inspection Service had been corrupt. Inspectors took bribes to certify unsafe vessels. Now let's look at what's rarely mentioned. 17th foolish captain, Captain Stefano Ventura of the MS Moby Prince Ferry collision and fire. April 10th, 1991. An Italian ferry collides with an oil tanker in the port of Livorno, causing a massive fire. 140 people die. Only one crew member survives. What happened? The ferry was entering port when it struck the anchored tanker Agip Abruzzo in thick fog. The collision ruptured fuel tanks and both ships erupted in flames. The ferry's crew failed to use radar properly. Captain Ventura didn't reduce speed in poor visibility. Emergency responses were delayed because port authorities initially didn't realize the severity of the fire. The sole survivor, a cabin boy, testified that chaos erupted immediately and no evacuation procedures were followed. The captain died in the fire, but investigations revealed he'd been negligent in navigation and hadn't followed basic safety protocols for operating in fog. And there's a continuation. 18th foolish captain, Captain Dominique Guido of the SS Normandy, fire and capsizing. February 9th, 1942. A magnificent French ocean liner being converted into a US. Troop transport in New York Harbor catches fire during welding operations. The ship capsizes the next day. 157 workers are injured, 3 die. What makes this foolish? The ship wasn't at sea. It was docked and being refitted. Multiple welding crews were working simultaneously without proper fire watches or safety measures. Sparks ignited stacks of flammable Kapok life vests. The fire spread rapidly. But here's the critical error. Firefighters pumped millions of gallons of water onto the upper decks. The ship, already listing slightly, became too top-heavy and rolled over. Naval architect William Francis Gibbs later testified that the ship could have been saved if they'd stopped pumping water and instead flooded lower compartments to stabilize it. The captain wasn't directly responsible, but the naval supervisors who allowed unsafe work practices were. The ship was scrapped after the war, a total loss from a preventable accident. Now attention, 19th foolish captain, Captain Vladimir Lisovoy of the MS Estonia ferry sinking, September 28, 1994. A ferry travelling from Estonia to Sweden sinks in the Baltic Sea during a storm, killing 852 people. It's one of Europe's worst maritime disasters. What went wrong? The ship's bow visor, the front door that cars drive through, was poorly designed and maintained. During the storm, it broke off. Water flooded the car deck. The ship listed rapidly and capsized within minutes. Captain Lisovoy and most crew were killed. Survivors reported virtually no emergency announcements or evacuation orders. The ship sank so fast that most passengers were trapped in their cabins. Later investigations revealed shocking negligence. The ferry company knew the bow visor locking mechanism was faulty but hadn't fixed it. The crew hadn't conducted proper safety drills. Warning signs of mechanical problems had been ignored for months. Several conspiracy theories emerged, but official investigations blamed design flaws and poor maintenance. Here's what usually isn't discussed. 20th foolish captain, Captain Stanley Lord of the SS Californian during the Titanic disaster. April 14th to 15th, 1912. The Californian was the closest ship to Titanic when it struck the iceberg. Possibly just 10 to 20 miles away, Captain Lord was asleep. His crew saw distress rockets from the sinking Titanic. They reported it to Lord. He told them to continue trying to signal with a Morse lamp and went back to sleep. He didn't wake the radio operator. He didn't investigate. He didn't steam toward the rockets. By morning, Titanic was gone and 1,500 people were dead. Lord later claimed the rockets he saw weren't from Titanic and that his ship was much farther away. Inquiries in both Britain and the United States condemned him for failing to respond. His career was ruined. Debates continue about exact distances and visibility conditions, but the basic fact remains. Rockets meant distress, and he did nothing. Hundreds might have been saved if Californian had responded immediately. It's time to continue. 21st foolish captain, Captain Gilberto Ferreira of the MV Dona Paz ferry collision, December 20, 1987. A Philippine passenger ferry collides with an oil tanker, the MT Vector, in the Tabla Strait. The resulting fire and sinking kill over 4,000 people, the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. What caused it? The ferry was massively overloaded, carrying possibly 3 times its legal passenger limit. The tanker was transporting highly flammable petroleum products without proper permits. Neither vessel had a proper lookout posted. They collided at night in calm, clear weather, meaning both crews were simply not paying attention. The tanker's cargo ignited, creating a floating inferno. The ferry sank within minutes. Only 26 people survived. Captain Ferreira died in the disaster. Investigations revealed systematic corruption. The ferry company routinely overloaded ships and bribed inspectors. Safety equipment was minimal. Crew training was inadequate, and passenger manifests were falsified to hide overcrowding. And now a fact rarely discussed. 22nd foolish captain, Captain Walter Lord, no relation to Stanley Lord, of the SS Mont Blanc explosion. December 6, 1917. A French cargo ship loaded with wartime explosives collides with a Norwegian vessel in Halifax Harbour, Nova Scotia. The resulting explosion is the largest man-made blast before nuclear weapons. It levels much of Halifax, kills nearly 2,000 people and injures 9,000. What happened? The Mont Blanc was carrying a deadly cargo: TNT, picric acid, benzol, and gun cotton. Captain Aimé Lemedec, correction on the name, was navigating the narrow harbour channel. The Norwegian ship Emo was exiting. Both vessels were travelling too fast. Confusion over navigation rules led them to turn toward each other rather than away. They collided at low speed. The impact sparked a fire on the Mont Blanc's deck. The crew, knowing what was aboard, immediately abandoned ship and rowed frantically to shore, screaming warnings in French that no one understood. The burning ship drifted toward a pier crowded with people watching the fire. 20 minutes later, it exploded with the force of roughly 3 kilotons. The captain survived and was initially arrested, but inquiries ultimately blamed both ships for negligent navigation in a restricted channel. This moment opens the most interesting part. 23rd foolish captain? Captain Panagiotis Kalogeropoulos of the MV Diamond cruise ship sinking, April 5th, 2007. A cruise liner strikes volcanic rocks near the Greek island of Santorini and sinks within hours. Miraculously, all passengers except 2 French tourists were rescued. Those 2 ignored evacuation orders and later drowned. What makes this foolish? The captain was sailing off the designated route, apparently trying to give passengers a closer view of Santorini's famous caldera cliffs. The rocks he struck were clearly marked on charts. He was showboating, and it destroyed a modern cruise ship worth $300 million. The vessel now rests in 400 meters of water, leaking fuel and considered an environmental hazard. Captain Kalogeropoulos was arrested and charged with causing a shipwreck and polluting the environment. He claimed equipment failure, but investigators proved he deliberately deviated from safe routes. And here comes an unexpected turn. 24th foolish captain, Captain Pedro Luis de Cordova y Cordova of the Spanish treasure fleet, hurricane disaster, September 19th, 1723. An entire fleet of Spanish ships loaded with gold, silver and treasures from the New World sinks in a hurricane off the Florida coast. Over 1,000 people die. What makes this the Captain General's fault? Experienced sailors and pilots begged him to delay departure from Havana, warning that hurricane season was at its peak. De Cordova refused. He was under pressure from the Spanish crown to deliver the treasure quickly. The fleet sailed directly into a massive storm. Ships were driven onto reefs and beaches along Florida's coast. Most sank. Survivors were stranded or attacked by local tribes. The economic impact on Spain was devastating. A small portion of the treasure has been recovered by modern salvagers, but most remains lost. De Cordova drowned with his flagship. His impatience cost Spain a fortune and 1,000 lives. Let's proceed. 25th foolish captain, Captain Ernst Hashagen and the SMS Cap Trafalgar armed merchant cruiser disaster, September 14th, 1914. A German ocean liner converted into an armed raider disguises itself as a British ship by painting fake funnels and changing its silhouette. It encounters an actual British armed merchant cruiser, HMS Carmania, off the coast of Brazil. Both ships open fire. The Cap Trafalgar sinks with heavy casualties. What's foolish here? Captain Hashagen's disguise worked too well. His crew hesitated to identify themselves, allowing Carmania to get dangerously close before the battle started. His ship wasn't properly prepared for combat. It was still partially fitted out and undermanned. Once the battle started, his inexperienced crew couldn't match Carmania's gunnery. The Cap Trafalgar caught fire and sank. Hashagen went down with his ship. German naval planners later admitted that converting luxury liners into raiders without proper training, equipment and crew was a waste of valuable resources. Now here's what truly fascinates. 26th foolish captain, Captain William Kidd and the adventure galley Rot. 1699. The famous pirate, though he claimed to be a privateer, watches his ship literally rot beneath him in the tropics. Kidd had been commissioned to hunt pirates but ended up accused of piracy himself. What's the foolish part? He neglected basic ship maintenance. Wooden vessels in tropical waters required constant careening, hauling them ashore to scrape barnacles and replace worm-eaten planks. Kidd didn't do this. His ship became infested with shipworms that ate through the hull. It started taking on water. He had to beach it and set it on fire to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. This left him and his crew stranded. They eventually seized another vessel and sailed to New York, where Kidd was arrested, sent to England and hanged for piracy and murder. If he'd maintained his ship properly, he might have completed his mission and returned a hero instead of dying on the gallows. And here's another example. 27th foolish captain, Captain Charles McVeigh, the third of the USS Indianapolis shark disaster, July 30th, 1945. A US Navy cruiser is torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sinks in 12 minutes. Of roughly 1,200 crew, about 300 die immediately. The rest float in the Pacific for 4 days before being accidentally discovered. Sharks attack the survivors continuously. Only 317 men survive. Hundreds die from exposure, dehydration, and shark attacks. What was Captain McVeigh's mistake? He wasn't zigzagging, though Navy procedure at the time made it optional. He wasn't informed that a Japanese submarine was operating in his path. After the disaster, the Navy scapegoated him. He was court-martialed for hazarding his ship. The submarine commander who sank the Indianapolis testified at the trial that zigzagging wouldn't have mattered. He would have sunk the ship anyway. McVeigh was found guilty but later restored to duty. The controversy haunted him. In 1968, he took his own life. Decades later, survivors campaigned to clear his name. In 2000, Congress formally exonerated him. His case is now studied as an example of institutional scapegoating and the trauma of survivors' guilt. The critical moment is here. 28th Foolish Captain, Captain Ronald Warwick, and the QE-2 grounding, August 7th, 1992. The famous luxury liner Queen Elizabeth II runs aground off Massachusetts while approaching a port. The tide goes out, leaving the massive ship sitting on rocks. No one is injured, but it's a humiliating incident for a prestigious vessel and experienced captain. What went wrong? Warwick, son of the previous QE-2 captain and himself a highly respected officer, relied too heavily on a local harbour pilot's instructions. The pilot, who'd recently suffered a minor stroke, though this wasn't known at the time, gave incorrect course information. Warwick didn't verify with his own charts. The ship struck submerged rocks at low speed. Fortunately, the hull's double bottom protected the vessel. Tugboats refloated it hours later. Kernard downplayed the incident and Warwick continued his career, but maritime experts noted he'd violated a cardinal rule. The captain is ultimately responsible for navigation, regardless of pilot instructions. Now, what's really worth considering? 29th Foolish Captain, Captain Pierre Lebrun of the SS La Bourgogne collision and panic. July 4th, 1898. A French passenger liner collides with a British sailing ship, the Cromartyshire, in thick fog off the Canadian coast. The La Bourgogne sinks within 45 minutes. 565 people die. Only 165 survive. What makes this especially tragic? Almost all crew members survived while almost all passengers drowned. Investigations revealed that crew members fought passengers for lifeboat spaces. Some crew cut lines to lifeboats full of women and children, sending them into the sea. Captain Lebrun went down with his ship, but survivors testified that he'd lost control and the crew panicked. The Cromartyshire, though damaged, stayed afloat and rescued some survivors. The disaster shocked the world and led to reforms in crew training and emergency procedures. And here's what's often hidden. 30th Foolish Captain, Captain Pasquale Calli of the SS Principessa Mafalda engine failure disaster, October 25th, 1927. An Italian ocean liner suffers catastrophic mechanical failure off the coast of Brazil. The propeller shaft breaks, tearing through the hull. The ship sinks in 2 hours. 314 people die. What was foolish? The ship had mechanical problems that were known before departure. Engineers had reported vibrations and unusual noises in the engine room. The shipping company, pressured by schedules and profit margins, ordered the voyage anyway. Captain Calli should have refused to sail or insisted on emergency repairs. Instead, he departed Genoa on schedule. Days later, in the middle of the ocean, the machinery self-destructed. The broken shaft spun violently, smashing through hull plates like a battering ram. Water flooded the stern. Lifeboats were launched chaotically. Several capsized or were swamped. 2 ships responded to distress signals and rescued survivors, but hundreds drowned. Inquiries blamed both the shipping company for poor maintenance and the captain for ignoring obvious warning signs. This next fact may surprise you. 31st Foolish Captain, Captain Ambroise Collin of the SS Afrique sinking, January 12th, 1920. A French passenger ship travelling from Bordeaux to West Africa sinks in a storm in the Bay of Biscay. 555 people die, including the famous Senegalese politician Blaise Diané's family members. Only 34 survive. What went wrong? The ship was old and poorly maintained. It shouldn't have been at sea in winter storm season. Captain Collin received warnings about severe weather, but pressed on. When the storm hit, the ship's ancient engines couldn't maintain steerage. It was driven onto rocks off the French coast. The wireless operator managed to send distress signals, and rescue ships arrived, but massive waves prevented effective rescue operations. Lifeboats were smashed against the rocks. Most people drowned within sight of rescue vessels. Colin went down with his ship. Subsequent investigations revealed the shipping company routinely operated unseaworthy vessels on colonial routes, prioritizing profits over passenger safety, and this connects to an important topic. 32nd Foolish Captain, Captain Alexander Marinesko and the Wilhelm Gustloff submarine attack, January 30th, 1945. A Soviet submarine torpedoes a German passenger ship being used to evacuate refugees and wounded soldiers from East Prussia as the Red Army advances. The ship sinks in 45 minutes. The death toll is estimated at 9,000 people, the deadliest maritime disaster in history by casualties. But here's the complexity. Marinesko was following orders to sink enemy vessels. The Gustloff was a legitimate military target. It was a German naval auxiliary carrying military personnel. However, it was also packed with civilian refugees, including thousands of women and children fleeing the Soviet advance. Marinesko didn't know the exact passenger composition. He attacked what appeared to be a military convoy. The Soviet Union decorated him as a hero. Western historians debate the ethics. Was it a war crime against civilians or a legitimate act of war? Marinesko himself showed no remorse. He'd followed his mission orders. The tragedy is less about captain foolishness and more about the horrors of total war, where distinction between military and civilian targets blurred. Let's look at the final example. 33rd Foolish Captain, Captain Francesco Schettino. Wait, we covered him at the beginning. Let me finalize with a different disaster. 33rd Foolish Captain, Captain Mohammed Hafiz of the MV Salahuddin to ferry fire and stampede. December 24th, 2003. A Bangladeshi ferry catches fire on the Buriganga River. The fire starts in the engine room but spreads rapidly. Passengers panic and rush to one side of the ship, causing it to capsize. 350 people die. What makes this particularly foolish? The ferry was grossly overloaded, operating at perhaps 3 times capacity for holiday travel. There were no functioning fire extinguishers. The crew had no emergency training. When fire broke out, crew members abandoned their posts immediately. The captain survived but fled and went into hiding. He was eventually arrested and charged with culpable homicide. Investigations revealed the ferry didn't have a valid safety certificate, hadn't been inspected in years, and was operating illegally. The disaster was entirely preventable and resulted from systemic corruption and individual negligence. So, what remains disputed? Maritime disasters often result from combinations of factors: human error, mechanical failure, bad weather, poor regulations, and institutional corruption. It's rarely one person's fault alone, though captains bear ultimate responsibility for their vessels. Some disasters labeled as foolish mistakes were actually unavoidable tragedies where captains made reasonable decisions with incomplete information. Others were clearly preventable, driven by greed, arrogance, negligence, or cowardice. What's certain is that maritime law has evolved dramatically because of these disasters. Modern ships have better technology, stricter regulations, mandatory safety training, and international oversight. Yet accidents still happen. The sea remains unforgiving and human error remains a constant factor. Some questions persist. How much responsibility lies with individual captains versus shipping companies and regulatory systems? When does a calculated risk become criminal negligence? And why do the same mistakes keep repeating across centuries? Overconfidence, ignoring warnings, prioritizing profit, or ego over safety? These 33 captains made choices that cost thousands of lives and countless fortunes. Their stories serve as permanent warnings about the price of foolishness at sea.